Lecture 7, Between World Wars and the Rise of Totalitarianism. World War I lasted from July 28, 1914 to November 11, 1918. In 1939, it was followed by yet another World War. During the time between these two wars, different versions of totalitarianism became established. The first form of totalitarianism we will examine, including its causes, will be German totalitarianism in the form of National Socialism, also known as Nazism. The second form of totalitarianism we will examine will be Italian, in the form of National Fascist Party. Finally, we will look at Russian totalitarianism that in 1922 became the Soviet Union. This chapter and lecture will conclude with Surrealism, an artistic style that began around this time. German totalitarianism. The German Empire, along with three other empires, ended at the conclusion of World War I in 1918. Once the German Emperor William II abdicated on November 28, 1918, as mandated by the 1919 Versailles Treaty, his empire was transformed into a democratic republic called the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic takes its name after the city where its constitution was written. Although the Versailles Treaty brought about greater political freedom, which many Germans were pleased with, its implementation entailed negative economic consequences. The execution of Article 231 of the Versailles Treaty was at least partly responsible for the dire economic circumstances of rapid inflation that occurred after World War I. And I'm going to read you an excerpt from the Versailles Treaty, Article 231. It's very famous. It's called the War Guilt Clause, and you'll see why. The Allied and associated governments affirm and Germany accepts the responsibility of Germany and her allies for causing all the loss and damage to which the Allied and associated governments and their nationals have been subjected as a consequence of the war imposed upon them by the aggression of Germany and her allies. In carrying out the requirement of Article 231, Germany admitted it had caused World War I, disarmed, gave up territory, and began to pay a substantial amount of reparation money. Since Germany did not have enough money to meet the reparation payments, it began borrowing money. The combination of borrowing and debt helped to cause, in the 1920s, an unmanageable inflation. In describing the German inflation of the 1920s, Eric D. White writes, and I quote, "By the end of November 1923, a single U.S. dollar bought 4.2 trillion marks. That's 4.2 trillion marks. Germans carried suitcases and pushed wheelbarrows full of money to buy a loaf of bread or a pair of shoes. They swarmed over the countryside and railroad yards like biblical gleaners or latter-day thieves, gathering potatoes that had been left behind in the field, or coal that had fallen off trail cars. Or they dismantled fences and took the wood for heating." In 1931, during the global economic crisis, which began when the stock market crashed in 1929, Germany, with the support of the U.S. President Hoover and the French, ceased paying the war reparation fee and did not resume until after World War II in 1953. Even though Germany was relieved of the requirement to pay its war debt, the inflation encouraged by it deeply affected the German psyche. In times of economic crisis, people often looked to a party led by a strong leader to solve their financial woes. The party that matched this description in many people's minds in Germany were the Nazis, the National Socialist Party, led by Adolf Hitler. During the 1920s and the 1930s, Hitler and his Nazi party rapidly grew in popularity. In 1932, Hitler had gained so much support among German voters that he became a strong contender in the German presidential elections. Even though Hitler, with 36.8% of the votes, lost the presidency to Paul von Hindenburg, who won 53% of the vote, he in a sense won since he convinced a number of industrialists that he and not Hindenburg could lead Germany to a prosperous future. Acting upon this conviction, these industrialists requested in a formal letter to President Hindenburg, which they sent to him, to appoint Hitler head of the government. Heeding their request, Hindenburg appointed Hitler head of the government with the title Chancellor. Not satisfied with this position, Hitler sought for ways to gain even greater power. He found the opportune moment to do so when on the 27th of February 1933, the German parliament building called the Reichstag was burned. Shortly afterwards, Hitler blamed the Communist Party for the burning and then banned them. The day after, on February 28, 1933, the decree of the Reich President for the Protection of the People and State, aka Reichstag Fire Decree, was issued. According to Article 1 of this decree, and I will quote it, Articles 1, 14, 15, 17, 18, 23, 24, 153 of the Constitution of the German Reich are suspended until further notice. Thus, restrictions on personal liberty, on the right of free expression of opinion, including freedom of the press, on the right of assembly, and the right of association, and the violations of the privacy of postal, telegraphic, and telephonic communications, and warrants for house searches, orders for confiscations, as well as restrictions on property, are permissible beyond the legal limits otherwise prescribed. Hitler not only supported this anti-civil rights decree, but he went even further by forcefully insisting that German parliament pass an enabling act, which would give him total power, absolute power. Out of fear, the Reichstag voted for the enabling act and sent the act to President Hindenburg, who, by signing it, put the law into effect. The enabling act centralized power in Hitler for 4 years. To indicate that Germany had entered into a new era, Hitler had the German flag replaced with a Nazi swastika and claimed that under his rule, Germany was once again an empire, the Third Reich. The Third Reich, asserted Hitler, was the legitimate successor of both the Holy Roman Empire and the Hohenzollern Empire. When in 1934 President Hindenburg, while still in office, died, Hitler proposed to the German electorate yet another way to consolidate total power in one individual, in himself. He requested that the Germans vote to name him both Germany's leader and chancellor, Führer and Reichskanzler. The German electorate voted in favor of this totalitarian act by almost an astonishing 90%. As the leader of Germany, one of Hitler's most horrific totalitarian goals was to ethnically cleanse Europe in order to colonize its lands with Germanic people. As the war progressed, Hitler's desire for Europe to be cleansed from the presence of non-Germanic people and people he considered to be non-desirable became explicit. Included on his cleansing list, but not limited to, were the Jewish people, the Romani, that we know as the Gypsies, mentally ill, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Slavic people. Hitler's military commander, Heinrich Himmler, was the mastermind for executing both Hitler's final solution of eliminating all Jewish people and Hitler's massive European ethnic cleansing plan. The so-called final solution plan gradually took on greater prominence the longer the Nazis were in power. Its result is called the Shoah by Jewish people and the Holocaust by others. By the end of World War II, in fulfillment of the final solution, 6 out of 9 million European Jews were killed by the Nazis. In 1943 speeches given in the town hall of Posen, Nazi-occupied Poland, Himmler argued for the extermination of the Jewish people. The excerpt below, and I'm going to quote it from the transcript, is as follows, and this is Heinrich Himmler, a very grave manner, the extermination of the Jews. I quote, "I also want to talk to you quite frankly on a grave matter. I mean the clearing out of the Jews, the extermination of the Jewish race. It's one of those things that's easy to talk about. The Jewish race is being exterminated, says one party member. That's quite clear. It's in our program, elimination of the Jews, and we're doing it, exterminating them. We have taken from them what wealth they have had. I've issued a strict order, which SS Lieutenant General Pohl has carried out, that this wealth should, as a matter of course, be handed over to the Reich without reserve. We have taken none of it for ourselves. Individual men who have lapsed will be punished in accordance with an order I issued at the beginning, which gave this warning. Whoever takes so much as a mark of it is a dead man. A number of SS men, there are not very many of them, have fallen short and they will die, without mercy. We had the moral right, we had the duty to our people to destroy this people which wanted to destroy us. But we have not the right to enrich ourselves with so much as a fur, a watch, a mark, or a cigarette, or anything else, because we have exterminated a bacterium we do not want, in the end to be infected by the bacterium and die of it. I will not see so much as a small area of sepsis appear here or gain a hold. Wherever it may form, we will cauterize it. Altogether, however, we can say that we have fulfilled this most difficult duty for the love of our people, and our spirit, our soul, our character has not suffered injury from it. That's an excerpt from the October 4th, 1943 speech by Heinrich Himmler. Himmler also planned for an even greater cleansing plan, his General Plan Ost, Eastern Master Plan. His 1942 version of this plan specified certain percentages of various European groups who may remain in their territory. Once this cleansing was accomplished, Germans were to immigrate to these lands and populate them. Fortunately, Himmler's plan was never brought into fruition since in 1945 the Allies, led by Britain, the USA, and the USSR, emerged victorious against the Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. In the following lecture, we will examine this war more closely. And I'm going to say a prayer to you. It's not really a prayer, it's a false prayer, because it's not to God. But this is a prayer composed during Hitler's regime. And it praises Hitler, and it is modeled after the Our Father prayer. This was recited by youth in support of Hitler as early as the 1930s, before the war began. And it says this: Adolf Hitler, you are a great Führer. Thy name makes the enemy tremble. The Third Reich comes. Thy will alone is law upon the earth. Let us hear daily thy voice and order us by thy leadership, for we will obey to the end. And even with our lives we praise Heil Hitler. Führer, my Führer, give me, by God, protect and preserve my life for long. You saved Germany in time of need. I thank you for my daily bread. Be with me for a long time. Do not leave me. Führer, my faith, my light. Hail to my Führer. Italian totalitarianism. Italian totalitarianism occurred during the same time that the Nazis were gaining power in Germany. It was led by Benito Mussolini. 1883 to 1945 is when he lived. He became the leader of the National Fascist Party and ruled Italy as prime minister from 1922 to 1943. Although originally drawn to socialist doctrine and once a party member of socialism, Mussolini split from the Italian socialists to found a party that promoted Italian nationalism. His followers were called Fasci di Combattimento, which the term fascism comes from. The full political terminology translates into bundles of fight. The Italian word fasci, meaning bundles, originates from the Latin word fasces, which refers to a thick staff of tightly bound sticks with an axe on top that Roman officials called lictores used to carry. In public processions, the lictores acted like bodyguards for ancient Roman magistrates. Mussolini's fascists acted not only as bodyguards, but also as thugs, specifically those called the Black Shirts, who intimidated those who opposed Mussolini's totalitarian political vision. In describing the spirit of fascism, Mussolini said it is, I quote, a religious conception of life, since fascists form a political spiritual community. He denied, though, that he advocated, I quote, the crazy idea of founding a new religion of the state or subordinating to the state the religion professed by all Italians. But I'd argue that's a distinction without a difference. He is doing exactly what he denied. Even so, he was denying something that he was in reality promoting. His words below, and this is in your transcript, I'm going to quote it for you, indicate that he was advancing a religion of the Italian state, an action forbidden by the first commandment. This is what Mussolini wrote. We have created our myth. The myth is a faith. It is a passion. It is not necessary that it shall be a reality. It is a reality by the fact that it is a good, a hope, a faith, that is courage. Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the nation. And to this myth, to this grandeur, that we wish to translate into a complete reality, we subordinate all the rest. Mussolini's dictatorship of Italy came to sudden end in 1943 after the Allies successfully invaded Italy. In April of 1945, Mussolini was executed along with his mistress. Their bodies were then hung upside down in Milan for all to see. Russian totalitarianism. In 1917, totalitarian socialism, otherwise known as communism, or international socialism, became established as the political and economic foundation of the Russian Empire. Pius XI, in his 1931 encyclical Quadragesimo Anno, condemned this type of socialism by strongly asserting, if socialism, like all errors, contains some truth, which moreover the Supreme Pontiffs have never denied, it is based nevertheless on a theory of human society peculiar to itself and irreconcilable with true Christianity. Religious socialism, Christian socialism are contradictory terms. No one can be at the same time a good Catholic and a true socialist. End of quote. Prior to the advent of the fundamentally flawed ideology of communism, Russia had been ruled for hundreds of years by monarchs called Tsars. Public confidence in the ability of the Tsars to effectively rule Russia was seriously eroded when Russia was defeated by the Japanese during the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905. In response to his people's lack of confidence in his leadership, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated in 1917. He was replaced by a provisional government that was splintered in various factions. One of the political factions that was hoping to rule Russia were the Bolsheviks. In time, the Bolsheviks, under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, would be called the Communists. The same year the Tsar resigned, Lenin led the Bolsheviks in a civil war against anti-communist forces known as the White Army. During the war, the Bolsheviks executed Russia's former Tsar Nicholas II and his immediate family. In 1922, the civil war ended with Lenin and his Bolsheviks as the victors. Lenin then formed the Soviet Union. Lenin would not see the fruits of his victory, since 2 years later, in 1924, he died and was replaced by Joseph Stalin. Stalin wanted the Soviet Union to be at least as industrialized as Western European countries and as the United States. Since building factories costs substantial money, he sought ways to raise capital to rapidly industrialize the Soviet Union within a span of only 5 years. His options were limited, since the Soviet Union, in comparison with the countries he envied, lacked a substantial wealthy population that could be effectively taxed and was not a major exporting nation. What the Soviet Union did have, though, were plenty of farms. In order to raise the needed money to industrialize, therefore, Stalin followed a 5-year plan from 1928 to 1932, during which farming profits were sent to the centralized communist state. The money obtained was used to build factories. To make this collection of money as efficient as possible, Stalin ordered the USSR to be collectivized and ruled by the state. The means he used to obtain his end of rapid industrialization entailed millions of peasants dying of starvation and millions more being imprisoned or killed during purges that he ordered. Art of the interwar period. Surrealism. Surrealism aimed at depicting thought of the unconscious mind free from rational restraint. The terminology unconscious mind comes from the Austrian psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. According to a more detailed definition of surrealism, in the surrealist André Breton's first Surrealist Manifesto, surrealism is, I quote, pure psychic automatism by which it is intended to express, either verbally or in writing, the true function of thought, thought dictated in the absence of all control exerted by reason, and outside all aesthetic or moral preoccupations, end of quote. The political ideology adopted by surrealism, before eventually breaking from this allegiance, was communism. One explanation for this connection was that since surrealistic artists focused on unconscious drives, they were drawn to communism that supposedly represented the unconscious social drive of people. Due to copyright restrictions, I was not able to find good examples of this art and place them in the transcript. God bless.